Okay, hello, good morning, good afternoon to those joining us in the Gulf region and Israel as well. My name is Raymond Karam and I'm the Chief Program and Development Officer here at AGSIW. We have well over 400 attendees registered for this webinar, and I'm delighted to welcome you all from across the globe. The August 13 agreement by the United Arab Emirates and Israel to institute a process of normalization has generated extensive news coverage and analysis, with the deal possibly ushering in a new era in Israeli Gulf Arab relations. While many details remain to be worked out, relations are moving forward, with the first civil aviation passenger flights between the two countries taking place earlier this week, along with a well-documented visit by the Israeli delegation to the UAE. To help us further analyze these developments, we're very excited to have a stellar lineup today with some of the most knowledgeable voices on this topic. First, joining us from Dubai is our good friend Mohammed Baharoon, who is a Director General of Bahuth, an independent public policy research center founded in Dubai, UAE in 2002, that focuses on international affairs, geostrategic affairs, public policy studies, and public opinion research. Welcome, Mohammed. Also joining us, Joshua Kresna from Israel, Senior Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute's program on the Middle East. He is an analyst specializing in Middle East political and regional developments and forecasting and international strategic issues. He recently retired after 30 years of service in Israel that included postings as an Israeli diplomat in Jordan and Canada. He teaches at NYU Center for Global Affairs and Tel Aviv University and is a fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies. Last but not least, and a bit closer to home, is Myra Rudman, the Executive Vice President for Policy at the Center for American Progress. Myra Rudman was most recently Senior Vice President for Policy Projects at Business Executive for National Security and led Quorum Strategies, a geopolitical strategic advisory firm. Her government positions have included serving as Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs in the Obama and Clinton administrations, Deputy Envoy and Chief of Staff for the Office of the Special Envoy for Middle East Peace at the U.S. Department of State, and Assistant Administrator for the Middle East at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Moderating the session today is our colleague Hussein Ibish, Senior Resident Scholar at AGSIW. He is a weekly columnist for Bloomberg and The National, based in the UAE, and is also a regular contributor to many other US and Middle Eastern publications. Hussein has extensively covered today's topic for AGSIW, and you can find his pieces and the work of our other scholars and contributors on our website, agsiw.org, where you can also sign up for our weekly newsletter to get the latest updates on our publications and events. A disclaimer before we start, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website tomorrow. Also, a reminder to our audience, you will be in listen-only mode, but you are able to ask your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom, or you can also email us at info@agsiw.org or tag us on Twitter at GulfStatesInst. With that, Hussein, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Raymond. This is really exciting because when I knew I wanted to do this panel, I thought, who do I want? And I came up with a dream panel, and here they are. It just worked out perfectly. So this is just ideal. And I'm most grateful to our guests, and I really appreciate it. If you want a great primer on the historical background of Gulf-Israel interactions, just look at Dr. Krasna's short essay that he published about a year and a half ago. It's the best single quick guide to the deeper history, the past 20 years. It's fantastic. And of course, Mohammed and certainly Myra have been working on this for ages and bring a wealth of Emirati, Israeli, and American perspectives to this issue. In addition to Raymond's excellent framing and narrative, I'd add there have been a couple of developments since then. Right, the UAE and Israel have actually signed an agreement to set up a committee, a joint committee, and this is the first specific deal because what they have committed to was a process of normalization, and it's not clear how that's going to roll out, and it's not clear how quickly it's going to lead to, say, opening of embassies and things like that. We just don't know. And I think when people ask what other country might be next, which is now a big topic of conversation that I keep getting interviewed about, one of the key things is obviously a lot of the other countries are going to be looking at how it goes for the UAE in particular. Do they get everything they thought they were promised? Does this cause them more headaches than it was worth? What about the blowback, et cetera? So the details, the kind of big breakthrough of, okay, committing to normalization outside of the framework of the API, most people would say, is obviously the headline, and that's going to dominate the public and political reception of this. But looking at the rollout, I think is going to tell us a lot about how policymakers, especially in other Arab countries, are going to look at the equation of costs and benefits in following the UAE and committing to normalization with Israel outside of the sort of API framework. And so this joint committee will look at financial services, investments, terrorism financing, money, criminal money laundering and stuff like that. It's very interesting. The other thing is that Saudi Arabia has confirmed there have been overflights by planes going to and from Israel before, but not an Israeli private registered commercial flight, which flew the other day very famously from Israel to the UAE and flew over Saudi. Saudi Arabia says now that all countries are welcome to use there. So in other words, it's a confirmation that Israeli aircraft, commercial aircraft, can overfly Saudi Arabia. And I think that is largely true. Qatar is, I don't think, welcome, but I think it's the exception. I believe even Iranian commercial aircraft can go over. So with that one exception, it's true, but it is an interesting sort of move. So let's talk conversationally about why this happened and where it's going to go. And let's begin by asking Mohammed one of the more interesting questions from a specialist point of view, and one that I think is harder to explain with just logic. It really needs some insight to get at this. What about the timing? I think everyone who follows this understands the myriad of reasons that the UAE would want a closer relationship with Israel, from cooperation not only with regard to Iran, but also Turkey, with question of tech and commercial links. It's the obvious partner for the UAE in the Middle East, given its technical prowess and its ambitions and stuff like that's all pretty clear. The American angle, but why now? What was it about August 13th and the weeks leading up to that led the UAE to take this decision then?
Thank you very much, Hussein, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Why now? Why not now? very easily.
Why not indeed, but why?
in fact, for anyone who's been looking at the Arab initiative, which started as King Abdullah's initiative, the question was that, what is a proof of concept that this could work? We needed someone to show that this can actually work. And I think the UAE has just done that.
Yeah.
Now, there is a more immediate answer to the why now, which is the concept of annexation, which was going to even, inflate the whole situation. And I think the concept of annexation is quite important because it is, a point of reference when it comes to how the UAE is thinking about this process. The reference is land, respect of land of the Palestinians. So that was the reference point. And anyone who've read Atabe's article should have expected that something more, because they've put the chips on the table at that point in time. Stop annexation, we will shake hands. And I think that was happened. So if 13 made you wonder, I think you should have gone back a little bit. There was a lot of signs saying that this is going to, but to me, we needed something like this since the announcement of the Arab Initiative. The calculus at that point was that it's sort of a whole deal. All of you come in, and all of us will shake hands together. And I think that is very unpractical, as it's proved. So we need a gradual movement. And I think now we've got the first step in proving that concept. And I think that would open up to, elaborating how this could develop anymore.
Yeah, and I think we will talk a little bit later in the conversation about how this fits in or doesn't fit in with the API, because I've written myself that I think it, in a way it breaks it, and in a way it saves it, and it's recomplicated. So and there are many different potential ways of interpreting, and of course we'll see. But let me turn to Dr. Kresna for a second and ask, from the Israeli point of view, there's no mystery about why Israel would have accepted such an opportunity at any time since its founding. I mean, this is just all benefit and virtually no cost. But there is a question of the commitment regarding annexation, and there's been some familiar Benjamin Netanyahu triple steps and back and forth about weapons sales and about the extent to which annexation has been very temporarily simply put on hold for a matter of weeks or months or something, whether it's basically, as President Trump said, so off the table for the foreseeable future. And so can you talk about this from the point of view of Israeli policymaking and also Israeli politics, and kind of give us an insight into the, let's say, the complications, because the benefits are obvious for Israel, but the complications are really thorny and difficult and kind of opaque.
So thanks. And so I think, as you said, the issues here are both mostly politics, mostly policy, some politics. And the truth is, in the current time in Israel, with the current administration in Israel, the two issues are so closely linked that it's hard to separate them. Netanyahu has been in campaign mode now for almost 2 years, and he's still in campaign mode. And part of the greatest claim that he has in this in his campaign mode is that he is kind of this foreign policy savant, right? Yesterday or 2 days ago, he spoke about how he has been working 25 years for this movement, and without him, we never could have gotten here.
What was his slogan? Another level or a different standard or something he had?
Netanyahu, a different league.
Okay, and that means
a different league.
A different league.
A different league, and this was with the pictures of him with Trump and Putin and Modi, and the idea being that no one else knows how to do what he knows how to do in foreign policy. So I think that the politics of this are, as you said, the politics also cause a little bit of noise here, because I think that he did take annexation off the table. And I think that, at least with a wink and a nudge, he explained that there wasn't going to be much opposition to arms sales. But once these issues were brought into Israeli political discourse, and they were brought into Israeli political discourse, I think, by both his political opponents, though they are also ministers in his government, but also by the Israeli national security establishment, which felt that it had been sidelined, right? It felt that he was doing personal diplomacy here, by the way, a long-standing Israeli tradition. Personal diplomacy, bypassing the apparatus, and the apparatus saying, "Well, we had something to say. If only you had spoken to us, we would have gotten perhaps a better deal." So, so then his spokesman and he himself had to almost play down the thing and say, "Well, we're getting something for nothing," right? But of course, they're not getting something for nothing, and this has caused, I think, a little bit of discomfort on both sides, because, well, I assume the Emiratis think and know they are getting something. So there's an issue here of things he has to say for his political constituency at home, but he has to say it with, as I said, with a kind of a nudge and wink, with understanding the other issue. But we're specifically regarding the annexation. So I have Israelis and Americans, and probably now Emiratis, thank goodness, who will ask me, wasn't this his plan all along? He brought up annexation.
Dr. Krasna may cut out a little bit from time to time due to bandwidth issues. So, can you go back to what you were saying before?
Yes. Yeah. So I said politically people ask me about annexation and did he really mean it, or did he bring it up in order to then have a card to give up? And I think no, he brought it up for political reasons, but it became very clear because of developments in the United States, because of relations with the American administration, that it wasn't going to go anywhere. Also, by the way, in Israel,
you mean he was being told by the Trump administration, hold off on this. This is not
being told by Trump, but also politically, it wasn't playing that well in Israel. It was playing
Right.
good among his base, but it was playing very poorly among his coalition partners, and certainly among the opposition, and in public opinion polls, it showed that it wasn't that popular.
Wasn't that popular.
So then sort of the person who put the chestnuts in the fire then got to pull them out and get rewarded for it.
Yeah.
And I think that part of this has to do with the American issue, and this I'm sure will go over to Myra, which is he said, look, the Trump administration isn't that happy with this.
Right.
And the Biden administration is not going to let me do it.
Right.
So with the annexation, in other words, so if the Trump administration is not that happy with me doing the annexation, and a Biden administration is not going to be happy either, so it looks like it's not going to happen. So I now have something which I really did mean, I hoped that I could use, but if I can't use it, I can now use it as a chip.
Right.
And I think that as you asked about the timing, any time in the past few years and any time for the next few years, none of us would have been surprised if something like this happened, because the relations have been getting much and much better, and the regional situation is such that these countries have become much, much closer to Israel. So here there was something on the table, two things. There was the possible change of an American administration, and there was the annexation issue, which he needed to figure out a way to neutralize, also because of the Jordanians, and the COVID, which maybe we'll get to. And all those things came together, and suddenly the timing became very appropriate.
Right. Okay, that's very, very helpful. But I think you have set us up for bringing Myra very patiently. Thank you very much for that, into the conversation. Yeah, I think that is sort of the question. The first question I'd like to ask you is the one that Dr. Kresna raised, which is, how is this playing politically in the United States? I think it's obvious that the Trump administration is delighted, and they're putting this on their very short list of supposed accomplishments, and they're trumpeting it and all that. How's it going down with Democrats? Emiratis seem to feel that it's been very well received by a lot of Democrats, and that's what it looks like. But what do you think the politics of this in the United States are? And then I'm going to follow up with you on policy.
Sure. Well, first, I very much appreciate having the chance to join this panel and to hear my colleagues. And I do think, in terms of how it's playing in the United States, when the right thing happens, it's nice to see that there is room for broad support. And that is what we have seen with this. I think a huge amount of credit goes to the Emiratis for leadership on this, and for smart execution, and for seeing opportunities as I perceive it, to provide an exit strategy for what would have been a terrible move, which is annexation. And really they provided Prime Minister Netanyahu and to some degree the Trump administration with clear exit strategy and the ability to preserve the opportunities for a two-state resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it does build on historic efforts by prior administrations, along with lots of conversations with Gulf leaders and with Israelis about how it's possible to build towards a gradual improvement of relations in the region, and link that to positive steps for the Palestinians. I certainly know during my time working with Senator Mitchell when he was the Middle East peace envoy, so the very beginning of the Obama administration, there was the initiation of discussions on these types of measures. So it is not surprising to me that there's widespread support among political leadership in the United States for the steps that have been taken. But again, I think tremendous amount of credit to the Emiratis and diplomatic acuity for seizing an opportunity and providing a way forward.
Okay, great. And so then the question becomes one of U.S. policy. What sort of opportunities do you think this opens up for the next administration, whether it's Trump or Biden? You would still have the same challenges and the same mostly set of tools. So, different worldviews, but still the same problem with the same toolkit. What sort of opportunities do you think this opens up for the next administration?
Well, I would say, personally, I have been a longtime proponent of meaningful steps that all parties, all stakeholders can be taking to preserve options, to see where opportunities are. And so I would see this as a key step in that direction. I would hope that there is opportunity for discussions for the Emiratis and others in the region with Palestinians, as well as with Israelis, about what concrete measures are going to be most important and most useful. So I think in that way, it opens up a tremendous amount of opportunity. At the same time, in the background, there seems to be, from public discussion of this, a key issue on the execution of the F-35 issue, and that presumably also will be playing out in the background over a number of months, just because of given how U.S. law and requirements work. It's a process that generally takes time unless the current administration tries to maneuver around what the requirements of the law are.
It would take years, right? I mean, it's not at all a quick process.
Correct.
Yeah. So here's the question. One more follow-up with you before we go back to Mohammed. Do you foresee any realistic possibility that UAE will not acquire F-35s?
I don't. I think that's answering hypothetical. I think it's
okay.
It's too early to know, and certainly the history of various sales in the region has been one that can be somewhat unpredictable. I think it's just there's a lot of discussions yet to be had, and of course, the United States has by law the requirement to preserve Israel's qualitative military edge.
Right.
And so all of that means that it will. Again, if the legal processes are followed,
right.
It will take some time to work through.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a great answer. So, Mohammed, which brings us back to the UAE. And so we've seen the first step, right? I think it was yesterday, with the signing of this, or the agreement to create a joint commission on basically a set of financial issues. And that's the first step. How do you see, do you have any insight on how the UAE imagines rolling out to the process of full normalization? Because there's a commitment to normalize, but that culminates with embassies and such. And do you have a sense of the speed the UAE is thinking of moving at? Is this going to be slow, medium, quick? And what are the sort of hurdles that need to be overcome in order to get there? If you have any sense of that, it would be great.
Well, speed. UAE is known for doing things fast. But also there are things that would need to happen in due course. There are things that could be expedited, and there are things that will need its own time. And I don't think it's in the interest of everyone to run into sort of a relationship that is not well founded. This has been a very long time of pretty much no relationship. Yes, there has been cooperation here and there, and sometimes through third parties indirectly, but normalization in the sense of full diplomatic, would possibly take a little bit of time. But however, all of this, I think, again, to me, and I'm trying to look at the big picture, is that this is relatively short. If we look back at the 70 years or 72 years, what we're seeing now is extremely fast, but it's also very preliminary. If I want to look at what is happening today, just in those last 2 to 3 weeks, the Arab initiative has turned from a footnote into the foreground. Everyone is talking. It has got a new type of animation, new energy that was not there something like 2 months ago. So it's moving up in a discussion, and it will make people start to realize, how can we go back into it? I mean, if I have a friend who's a collector of old prints, and the joke about him has always been, come on, you can buy the same book, if you're talking about the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, from Amazon for a fraction of the price. And it's exactly the same words. Why do you go on? They forget the historical aspect of what is an old print or a first edition. So we need to look at it not as it is today, not into the terms of the F-35, or the financial arrangements, or even the technology transfer. We would see what type of change that is going to happen. 70 years, we had one calculus. It's friend or foe. So you're either on this side or on that side. And it has always been framed as the Arab conflict. The Arab conflict turned from a political issue of occupation between Palestine and Israel into an Arab thing between Arabs and Israelis, into a religious thing between Jews and Muslims. And this dichotomy has grown beyond. There are people who have built institutions, agendas, political, ideology all around this hatred. There are countries who only look at hatred of Israel as its only existence. If we're starting to change that calculus, we will win more to the center from both sides, not only from the Arab side, but also from the Israeli side. There are people on the far right on both sides. And I think that is the real value of changing the whole calculus. The Israelis do not need to be entrenched as they used to be before, because there's they don't have enemies everywhere. And that will force them to think differently. Same thing about the Palestinians. They also don't need to look at all of the Israelis as enemies and find new ways of living together. And I think this is the accumulative value. This is how we need to look at it, rather than look at it today as it is today, as the type of deal on either COVID-19 or on knowledge transfer, agriculture, finances. This is, to me, is byproduct. But the real product is not going to happen today. It's going to happen over time, and it will get more people possibly to see the value.
So a lot of Palestinians, you mentioned the Palestinians, a lot of Palestinians seem to feel betrayed by this. And they are very skeptical of the argument that this brings the API back into the foreground, because what they say is the API put an end to the occupation, or at least progress towards an end to the occupation, at the foreground of steps towards normalization with Israel. What all the Israelis have agreed to here is not to go further and not to annex. It doesn't do anything to roll back, they say. And therefore, they say this basically breaks the API, and it creates a new framework that does not give them anything except a relief from additional pain, but it doesn't do anything to resolve. This is what they say. So I'm wondering how you would look at that.
I definitely look at it as the number one step was stop annexation. Annexation is occupation. You're taking more land. So to say that it is not against occupation, no. And not of any of the discourse that came out of the UAE says that we dropped the UN resolutions on Palestine, that it's not an occupation anymore. None of this has been said. So
well, they specifically said the opposite, right? They specifically said they're still in favor of all of that. So, yeah. I mean, UAE officials.
Discourse from the, highest authority in the UAE says we're committed to the peace initiative, the Arab peace initiative. We're committed to the two-state solutions. Now, if you're a Palestinian and think that this is rewarding Israel, I think that's the half-empty cup that you're looking at, because there's a very strong commitment to the Arab Peace Initiative, and I think it's a very not only verbal commitment. All the political aspects has been tied up to this. Now, people could say, well, Israel can turn back and go back to the annexation, but it's possibly going to lose a lot out of that. and it's going to lose the goodwill, the reception people of, the new look people are having to Israel, the new perceptions of Israel as a possible partner of peace. And I don't think the Israeli people would want to lose all of that.
Dr. Krasna, can I ask you then, based on that, in the Israeli context, assuming that there is a need for a two-state agreement eventually with the Palestinians, or some other kind of workable modus vivendi, which gives the parties what they need at a minimum, is there a sense in which this agreement complicates in the long run the ability of Israeli political leaders or the Israeli civil service or others to advocate making concessions to Palestinians, because it does seem to take the idea that the occupation is a barrier to improving ties with Arab countries and put it in a very different context, one in which it becomes more an opportunity than a barrier, etc. And does it complicate those things, or does it create new opportunities for pursuing that?
So I would say both or neither. And the reason I say that is simply, I think the vast majority of Israelis who think that there needs to be a solution of our issues with the territories and with the Palestinians, which is either a small majority or a very large minority, think that we need to do it because of ourselves and the Palestinians and not because of the Arab states.
Right.
The argument that the reason we have to reach an agreement with the Palestinians is to help us in the Arab world is a minority argument in Israel. It's an argument which is made, I would say, by people of a more sort of neo-realist view in the center or the center-right of Israeli politics. But I think a lot of people in Israel feel that the reason we need to achieve it is because the Palestinians are our closest neighbors. We live very closely with them, and that living together sometimes doesn't work very well. In other words, I think there are many Israelis who, for moral reasons, think that we need to solve the issue of the territories. And I think there are even more than that. There are Israelis who have become convinced over the years that whatever the theoretical, historical, or moral rights are to those territories is not relevant anymore. There's there are people. I don't like the terms left or right in Israeli politics. There are people who think that morally or for various reasons we should be giving the Palestinians what they deserve. There are those in the middle who think that there is no other choice, and there are those on the right who think we have to give them the bare minimum and we have to extract the most we can. So it's sort of hard for me to say whether it doesn't make it harder to reach peace with the Palestinians if we had a generally accepted in Israel in the Israeli political system, if we had a partner who Israelis felt that we could engage with, if the Palestinian political entity wasn't bifurcated between what is in fact two de facto states led by different leaderships. I think those are the main issues, and not whether we've reached an agreement or not. I do think, and this maybe is in partial answer to the second half of your question, there will certainly be those in Israel, the ones who I said on sort of first principles are not that interested in solving the Palestinian issue, who will say, well, look, we don't really need to solve it because we're getting gains and we're getting regional acceptance without giving up anything on the Palestinian issue as well. But as I said, the Palestinian issue for most Israelis is not only, it's a more multifaceted issue than simply would it help us or not help us in our international position.
Yeah, it has a way of reasserting itself very suddenly,
absolutely,
and very dramatically. So you can
absolutely. Knock on wood, right?
It is very much there all of a sudden. So yeah. So Myra, here's the sort of question from an American point of view that comes off of all of that, which is what could. There are sort of two angles of the diplomatic opportunities for the United States in the region that this may open up on various different fronts, which I'd like you to talk about. And then as a sort of follow-up, I'm going to ask you a two-part question, which is really two different questions in a way, and you can handle it however you like. the United States relationship with the Palestinians has become virtually non-existent at this point during the Trump administration. Obviously, if you want to get anywhere on the question of the dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian issue and really a peace agreement, which this is not, since there is no war. How can the U.S. start to repair its relationship with the Palestinians? Is this another blow to U.S. chances, or does it give the U.S. some leverage and a way back in with the Palestinians? So those are sort of two. I hope that's not too much all at once, but do what you can.
Thanks. No, I appreciate it. I think those the two questions that you set up are, to me, linked, because diplomatic opportunities in the region, though it may not be a particularly popular way of thinking about it, are firmly linked in one way or another to what the U.S. relationship with Palestinians is perceived to be, and I would say more broadly, the U.S. ability to lead in the region. And I would put that in the context of the meeting that occurred just yesterday in Vienna with the six current signatories to the JCPOA. And who those countries are, and the fact that the United States has ended up as the isolated party, which is not good for the region, not good for the very significant concerns we have about Iran and Iran's behavior, and I would argue not good for Israel or the Palestinians or the Emirates, anyone that we have represented on this call and beyond. And so, laying that out, to start with your second question first, what can the United States do vis-a-vis the Palestinians? This, I think, is not an issue for the United States alone. It also goes to my colleagues who, among the Emiratis, other Gulf states, the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians. There needs to be a broader conversation, I believe, with Palestinian leadership about ways to move forward. We have, unfortunately, I believe, reached a situation with them where they have, I would argue, reverted back from the Arab Peace Initiative to the three no's, no, 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 just an overall kind of rejectionist viewpoint. And I want to distinguish certainly the Palestinian Authority leadership continues to be committed to peaceful approaches, but has an overall rejectionist standpoint in terms of being able to talk through what options are, and I would say to think creatively about where opportunities are right now. I believe they also do not have an Israeli leadership that has been serious or committed about thinking through with them where realistic options are, nor have they had an American administration that has that approach. So I would say it takes a change in administration. It takes a looking at how we in the United States can help to make real differences on the ground for Palestinians. And we do not do that by taking away all of the funding that we have provided in the past for water, for water and for sanitation and for jobs and opportunities, and removing that. And nor do we do that by taking away all of our support for UN entities and organizations as well. And we have been doing that. And so there are positive things that we can offer in terms of making a difference on the ground in the lives of all Palestinians, and that is in the West Bank and in Gaza, both, and to be seen to be doing that as well. And I believe we need to work with other key stakeholders in the region in talking to Palestinians and frankly talking to the Israelis as well, because I would argue that for the United States, for Israelis, for Palestinians, these are existential questions. Yeah. I think they go beyond moral questions, because part of Israel's position in the world and certainly the longstanding United States relationship, it's a key strategic ally, but there's also a special value-based relationship. And that is centered on being a democratic state as well as a homeland for the Jewish people. And this is part of the reason I believe that the Emirati action here was so critical in saving opportunities going forward, because had annexation moved, we would have really locked in a one-state reality. Oh, yeah. And you have 14 million people, only 7 million of them are Jewish Israeli citizens, with a governance structure that I would argue is untenable. Mm-hmm. Not in the United States' interest, not in the interest of the parties, not in the interest of the region. Oh, and yeah. So we need to look for where their opportunities are to build from there. I'm going to hold back on the broader diplomatic opportunities because I've been talking for a while.
No, I think it's fine, but I will come back to you on that. So we'll do one more round, and you can take quite a bit of time on the broader diplomatic opportunities then, and then we'll start looking at audience questions. Mohammed, I'd like to ask you about the impact on the Emirates. I mean, obviously, there's a new relationship with Israel that's being developed, a great strengthening of relations with the United States on a bipartisan basis, and everyone in the U.S. establishment, as far as I can tell, welcomes this very strongly, and it's been very good for Emirati-U.S. relations, no doubt. But what sort of opportunities and challenges does it open up for UAE regionally? No, in the rest of the Middle East, taking Israel aside, with regard to the other GCC countries, the boycott of Qatar, for example, relationship with antagonists like Iran and Turkey, and allies, Saudi Arabia and others who have yet to move in this direction, who are not being critical, yet they are not doing exactly the same thing, and they clearly are watching with interest and with maybe some skepticism, I don't know, or just to see what happens. How does this fit into the rest of the Emirates regional relations, and how does it impact those? It's a lot to answer, but to take what you want from it and give us your take.
Let's start with saying that this is, a bilateral relationship between two countries, two sovereign countries. Yeah. It does not, impeach or affect any other country in the region. So at that level, it does not, affect any of the other countries in the region, except in sentiments, maybe. But diplomatically, it doesn't mean if I open up a diplomatic relationship with Israel, that means I would need to reduce my diplomatic relationship with X country or Y country. So it's not in that. The second thing is that, as I said, we're trying to look at things differently. We're actually de-escalating in the entire region. And this quote unquote conflict has been one of those things that people have used repeatedly, all the way from terrorist groups like Qaeda or Daesh, who always want to liberate Palestine, all the way to someone like Saddam Hussein, who said, I'm invading Kuwait to liberate Palestine. Or Jerusalem. So there has been a lot that has been built on this type of hatred. We're changing the discourse on that. And I think this goes along everything that the UAE has been doing so far, including the concept of tolerance, the concept of respect to other religions, because we don't want to turn a political issue into an identity crisis or an identity struggle between this religion or that religion, or this race and that race. So in that concept, I think it's actually beneficial to the region. Now, there are, Jordan and Egypt, both of them had similar deals. I wouldn't say exactly similar. They had different circumstances, but they had, a bilateral deal with Israel. And yes, at a certain point of time, it affected, for instance, Egypt's relationship with the region. I don't think we see the same type of reaction today, which means we're possibly moving in the right direction. There is a fatigue from all of this concept of animosity. And I think there is a drive to start changing it. The long-term impact, I think, would possibly be better in the region rather than worse. So does the UAE sort of affect its relationship, let's say, with Saudi based on this? I don't think so. I mean, Saudi has respect for the UAE sovereign decision, but also we also have a respect for the Saudi sovereign decision. They would possibly look at this as an experiment. As I said, it's a proof of concept. Let's see how far would it affect Israeli, thinking, behavior, discourse, and is it going to turn the needle a little bit more towards the peace? And I think that would encourage other people to even test it even more.
No doubt, yeah. I mean, so let me ask you, I mean, do you think people, myself included, have speculated, and I'd like you, Mohammed, to address this, and then I'd throw the same question from an Israeli point of view to Dr. Kresna right afterwards. Are we right in believing that a shared view of not only the nature but the intensity of the emerging threat from Turkey and its basically Sunni Islamist coalition was a major factor in bringing UAE and Israel together at this time and ensuring that UAE was the first of a set of potential states that might have done this to go ahead and do it? And how was that a significant factor, or is this wrong? What do you think?
I mean, if you're looking at Islamic or let's say even religious, not specifically Islamic, type of dogma against the Jewish people and Israel, then that has been there for quite a while, and it has nothing to do specifically with
let me clarify. No, let me clarify exactly what I mean. What I mean is that what's being posited is that while many countries in the Middle East are kind of alarmed to see the rise of Turkey and its coalition, including Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood parties, Hamas and the GNA and others, this sort of inchoate bloc emerging, that maybe UAE, Israel, and possibly Egypt have a special, sort of a particular degree of alarm about this, and that this might have been a factor. And if you don't think so, please tell me. But that's what I'm kind of asking you about.
I don't think Turkey specifically is a major factor in the peace deal. I mean, okay, people deal with this agreement as some sort of a surrealistic painting. Everyone from a certain angle would look at it and explain it in a certain way.
It's Russian, yes.
Turkey has been there, and it has, and again, I wouldn't say Turkey. I would say Erdogan more than Turkey.
Yeah,
there is
of course, I mean Erdogan.
And they behave differently, at least to me.
No.
So, but
I don't mean Turkey existentially.
And it's not only Turkey, and it's also not Iran. This thing is not about Iran. It's not about Turkey. Right. It's actually about the future of this region.
Right. Okay, great. And so, same question from an Israeli point of view to you, Dr. Krasna. Do you think this is a factor, or is this overblown, or?
So I think that both our states, both the UAE and Israel, have shared, let's say, pictures of what the threats and challenges are in the region, but they stack them differently, right? So I think that Israel is much more, that both countries are concerned by Iran, but Israel is more concerned by Iran. Israel has less of has no engagement in Iran to the extent that UAE has some and has historical engagement, and other players in the region who are perhaps seen as more challenging to the UAE are seen as challenging to Israel, but less. I'll just point out that apparently yesterday Qatar negotiated a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. So we have this complicated relation where, for instance, we have a loaded relationship with Qatar, but it's a real relationship and it's been ongoing for almost as long as our relationship with the UAE has been ongoing. I do think that the countries see the threats in the region together. This maybe goes to your previous question to Myra. I think that what brought these countries closer together in the beginning, and not only them and Saudi Arabia and some of the other actors, was a feeling from what you would call the U.S. ability to lead, right? From the feeling that the U.S. was receding, and by the way, not only under the current administration, it's already been going on since the Iraqi war. that we needed to reconstruct a regional security architecture, which doesn't exclude the Americans, because the Americans are supremely important in it, but needs to be built on regional forces who are facing regional threats without always expecting the Americans to be able to intervene and balance from outside. And that really is something that brought all of these countries together to deal with the various threats in the region, no matter how they listed them. So I think absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things about, I think Israel was waiting to have a relationship with other Arab states.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because of Turkey or because of Iran.
Oh, sure.
Turkey and Iran perhaps provided the impetus to enable these relations to become closer. But of course, Israel was always very enthusiastic about having a closer relationship with these states. It's just that the regional and more broader strategic considerations of their partners didn't necessarily enable that. So I don't think, Turkey is of great concern to Israel, by the way, not as an enemy. I would say as a rival. I would certainly accept Mohammed's discussion of Erdogan as regard Turkey. Turkey has been Israel's ally for many years, and we hope will be Israel's friend again in the future. But right now is fairly, poses a lot of challenges to us, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Okay, great. And so, Myra, you know what I'm going to ask you, which is to continue where you left off with the diplomatic opportunities. Take as much time as you like, go into as much detail as you want, and then after that, we'll start looking at questions, and I'll throw them out to the group. So go right ahead, please.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate that, and Dr. Krasna has laid out some points that I agree with, some points I don't agree with. To me, the most important opportunities here, and I believe they are being built on foundations that have been laid for some time, are to look at the security and economic architectures that can be created and strengthened in the region. I believe strongly that is part of, that the U.S. has a key role in that. That is not because of an abdication of a U.S. role. That is a necessary but not sufficient component of working to build those architectures on both the security and the economic side. It's also strongly in the United States' interest to be doing that, not only because of concerns about Iran and Iranian behavior, because of looking at the security and sustainability of how the region proceeds, and the important role the region plays in the rest of the world. And also what we've seen over the last few years, which is the degree of encroachment and very problematic behavior by other key world actors, China, Russia. And so if the United States should leave a vacuum, it's not, it is to the detriment, not only of the United States, but of global security and stability. And so looking at building out regional architectures on security issues and on economic issues, and looking to greater regional cooperation among like-minded actors is in the interests of all the entities represented on this call and beyond in the region, in the world.
Okay, great. So let's look at some of the questions that we've been getting through the Q&A function, through chat. And if anybody else would like to submit a question, we'd be really grateful to you, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can do. You know, there is a question from Karen Dabrowski about the UAE's role in Yemen, and whether or not Israel would be useful in supporting that, and could Israel ever, she asks, support the independence of southern Yemen, and also the establishment of Israeli information gathering facilities on the island of Socotra. So if any of you would like to, it's not really aimed at anyone. I guess maybe Mohammed and Dr. Kresna would be obvious candidates, but if any of you want to address any of those things, it would be great.
I can't answer for the Israelis, so I'll leave it to
Fair enough. All right. Would you? Yeah. What about that?
So regarding the second part of the question, I don't know.
Yeah.
Regarding the first part of the question, I'm one of those Israelis who while he thinks that we're very, very important and a major player, understands our limitations as well. I don't think that Israel has an opinion on whether Southern Yemen should be free, and I don't think the Southern Yemenis or anyone else cares what our opinion is. Right. So, so we need to remember where our place in the region is improving, but we need to remember where our place in the region is. And I mean, we are worried about Yemen in specifically in the context of the situation that has developed there, which has afforded opportunities to the Iranians. But Israel, I don't think Israel is in the business of shaping the region outside of its immediate, while we do have obviously issues regarding the Palestinian territory, this is something where we would have an interest in what the developments are, but we certainly don't feel that we have a role in developing.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, obviously that's true, I think. So there's a couple of questions that I'll conflate just for the purposes of time that have to do with Saudi Arabia. Now, none of you are Saudis, none of you are particularly expert in that, but people do want to know whether, to the extent to which you think Saudi Arabia might be tempted to, or might be interested in the future, sort of following on the lead of the UAE in this regard. So, if anybody wants to tackle that, that would be fine, and if not, I'll move on. But
I would say that the Saudis were very clear about what's their position on eventual. Move towards a peace agreement that is based on the Arab Initiative, and I think this is something shared by the UAE, by everyone else. Now, I can't again speak for the Saudis, but I think if I was in a position to see that this move is actually leading somewhere, they would possibly considering it, and I'm sure that they're looking at how this is developing. It's in motion, and I think this is something that both the UAE and the Israelis should look at. What we're doing today could determine how people would see that type of relation and its value. And I think that would require a lot of work on making that this concept actually proven to be right.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'll just throw out one observation of my own, which is that I think it is possible, but I think it is probably much more likely to happen after King Salman is no longer on the throne. I think King Salman is very committed to the traditional reading of the API, very committed to a certain position on the Palestinian cause, and it'd probably be his successor who is more likely to make such a move. The only other thing I would add is that the strategic calculations of Saudi Arabia are a lot more complicated than smaller states, no matter how important they might be. They have regional roles, pan-Islamic roles, things like that, and a degree of political complexity domestically that smaller neighbors, no matter how sophisticated and important, don't have. So, it's a more complicated question.
Hussein, I would say, echoing all that you have laid out, and I would also point people to some of the things that you've written recently that provide that helpful layout in terms of the Saudi position and sensitivities, and the reasons why this may take more time. What I would also want to emphasize is I would hope that given the significant role that the Kingdom Saudi Arabia plays in the region, that this would, that the Saudis, any moves the Saudis make in this direction would be a real opportunity to look at what is going to be most important for Israelis and Palestinians going forward, and how that can be, any move that they would make could be tied to whatever further very significant step might be between the parties, which for all the reasons that we've discussed would be in everyone's interest.
Right.
If I may, Hussein, I would respectively, disagree with you. I don't think that the way Saudi Arabia is looking at it has to do with the life of King Salman or not. My reading, my own personal reading of him is that he's committed to the Palestinian people. And rights. And if this is going to achieve what he thinks is rightful for them and what they agree to be rightful to them, I think he will support it, regardless.
That's a good point. Yeah,
He's not a rejectionist. He's not the guy who would say no, 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 no. I don't think he's proven to be a very strategic leader, and I would hugely doubt that this has to do with personality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. If this proves to be a huge boon to all those things, then I think that changes the calculation. That's perfectly true. We've got another question here from Eric Pilowski, who's asking about to what extent do you panelists believe that Middle East and Gulf leaders are vested in the outcome of the election, and if so, how is that driving their behavior? I mean, is this part of the calculation?
So maybe I'll kick this off. I think my perception is, and I'm very interested in hearing Mohammed's perception afterwards. I think that a lot of the logic behind this has to do with the American elections. I mentioned this before. I think that both the leaderships in both countries wanted to give a gain to President Trump. Both of the countries have. Both the leadership in both of the countries are close to the Trump administration and would be happy to have continuation rather than change. But both of them are also, as I said, the wonderful thing about this deal is, as Myra pointed out, it positions them well no matter who does okay in the American election. I think this is, and I'm talking to partially to an American audience, so I have to be careful. Is the most significant.
Again, we have, but it's only our second cutout, so we'll.
So can you hear me now?
Yes. Can you begin with the most significant?
Yes. Yeah, so I'd say this is the most significant foreign policy achievement that the Trump administration has actually had until now. And it was given to it by two of its closest allies in the region. Yeah. So nothing happens, nothing in the world, certainly nothing in the Middle East happens in a political vacuum.
Well, let's do a follow-up on that. Do any of you believe that the Trump administration was indispensably crucial in the development of this, or did they just happen to be there when this happened?
Can I say that, since Camp David, we haven't seen enough energy put into this issue until recently. Now, whether we would agree or disagree, what type of energy, was it useful or not useful? Was it in the right direction or not? But the end of the day, there has been a lot of energy. It has been pushed right to the beginning. It has tripped a lot of wires. But what we've seen right now is that energy has led to something. So I wouldn't discredit what the Trump administration did. Now, again, I understand that in the cycle of 4 years, and at every election, people will try to pick up wins, position things in a certain way. That's what campaigns do. But at least from where I see it, I see the longevity of it. And I think that we haven't seen enough energy. Whether that energy was in the wrong direction, but it led to something positive, we can argue that. But there has been a lot of energy on that.
Mm-hmm. Either of the other of you?
Sure. Well, the one thing I have to disagree with my colleague here is the lack of energy and commitment, if that's what you're indicating from prior administrations. Having worked for President Clinton at the National Security Council during the time of that Camp David, I certainly agree with the degree of his commitment. But I also have seen both from President Bush and from President Obama a tremendous investment and commitment to these issues. So it has been part and parcel of how the United States has operated. I wouldn't surprise anyone to know have serious concerns with a variety of things that the current administration has done in the Middle East and throughout the world that I think have absolutely been to the detriment of the United States and of international security and stability. So I just can't accept that proposition that the energy has come now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have been lulls, definitely. But you did see a lot of energy in Bush second term, a lot of energy in Obama first term, the whole business with the settlement freeze. And that was a lot of energy. I'm not sure it worked out, but Yeah, I think that's obviously true. But let me, Dr. Krasna, did you want to say something?
Just one thing. I think this particular vector that is developing relations between a leading conservative advanced Gulf country and a conservative Israeli government, leaving the Palestinian issue almost on the sides, would probably not have been pursued by other administrations. In other words, whether it was the proof of pudding is in the eating. It's an achievement that I think was achieved by a specific strategy that was selected by this administration, which might not have worked, by the way, in all of its characteristics. Until this happened, we would have thought that the Trump peace plan was a dead letter, and in the end, sort of one part of it suddenly came into fruition. And I think that also, as I said, that has to do also with what maybe, at least looking at from our point of view, I can't speak for the Emiratis. I think the Israelis did want to give Trump an achievement, and this was an achievement that was a win-win for them in almost every direction.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let me carry on then to another question from my AGSIW colleague, Emma Soubrier. She wants to know about the defense industrial dimension of the agreement. And she wants to talk about, or she wants you to talk about the transfer of Israeli technical expertise and supporting the ambition of the UAE to create its own domestic defense industrial base, and it would be cyber, AI, drones, etc. Is that, and so Mohammed, is that something the UAE is hoping will be part of this relationship in the long run? And Dr. Kresna, do you think that's something that Israel would be enthusiastic in getting involved in?
I mean, if you're talking about the potential is there. But what is happening right now is that what takes lead is things like health, agriculture, finance, trade. That's what is taking the lead at this point. Acquisition of defense material. This is something that the UAE has always looked at, and it has looked at from various partners. So the UAE has got defense equipments from the US, of course, primarily, but also from France, also from Germany, from China, from Russia. And I think the development of partnership, and I think this is the new reality of the 21st century, is that people would want to develop knowledge transfer. It's a very important element of all of their planning. And their partners are going to be the partners who are willing to share that knowledge. And we've seen this happening across a number of sectors. So if, let's say, the US says, no, we cannot share that knowledge with you, but then the Israelis come and say, this is critical to you, we will be willing to share our own knowledge with you. I think the equation would be very obvious. But I doubt that this is the current discussions on the table at this point.
Fair enough. Dr. Krasna, how do you think Israel looks at this as a possibility?
So I'll start with a general observation in that, unlike the Egyptian and Jordanian peace treaties, which started with a political peace treaty and are very slowly, if at all, normalizing, here it was backloaded, right? The normalization, in terms of normal relationships between people in the two countries, have been going on the industrial, high-tech, security, and other levels for a long time, and now we're reaching the formalization of it. And I think part of that, and there've been a lot of reports of this, of course, have to do with the interest of the UAE, both in gaining access to Israeli high-tech abilities, and specifically in the security and internal security realm. And I think that Israel has been willing to cooperate in those fields with the UAE and other states in the Gulf, and will probably continue to do so even more significantly now that the country's formal relations are perhaps or probably jumping forward. With that doesn't necessarily impact on the F-35 issue, which I think is an issue which, as I said, I think it's sort of a red herring that's been put out there, which will have to be taken off the table. I don't think anyone in Israel expects, after the Egyptians and the Jordanians both received a significant upgrade in their strategic and political relations with the United States after signing peace treaties with Israel. I can't imagine that anyone in Israel thinks that that's not going to happen with the UAE as well. I also don't think that Israel is going to challenge this administration, certainly on the Hill, having to do with arms sales, which is something that is crucially important to Donald Trump and to his administration.
Right.
Hussein,
Yes,
I just
Myra.
want to just jump in though on the issue of technology transfer and knowledge sharing of highly sensitive information. We in the United States have every reason, as we are seeing from the jeopardy that our current elections are being placed in, of being extraordinarily concerned about what Russia and China are doing. And it is a major concern and threat to us and to much of the security and stability of the rest of the world.
Yep.
So I think we need to be very cautious in what we talk about when we're talking about technology transfer, knowledge sharing, and let's be clear, given the past relationships the United States has had and current relationships the United States has with the Emirates and with Israel, it is hard to imagine sharing of sensitive technology that does not directly implicate the United States. So talking about Russia and China in the same sentence is a deep concern and should be a huge flag for a number of Americans.
And there have been bilateral tensions between Israel and the United States regarding Israel's relations with China in terms of technology transfers and whatnot. There was some pretty bitter disputes in the past about that, or flare up. Anyway, please.
Very shortly, the realization of the world around us right today is that it is not a unilateral, a unipolar universe.
Right.
And it's pretty much a multipolar one. And in that way, managing relationships is going to be a brinkmanship, if you want, but it's actually a way of doing, business. And it takes a lot of confidence and trust built to become a strategic partner at a certain point. And I think, this is how we want to perceive our partnership, particularly with the US, but also with Europe, that there is a certain level of degree of trust and we can manage. I mean, with all due respect, Myra, there is a condescending, approach saying that if we give you this type of technology, you're going to misuse it. There is a condescending approach to that. And I think that would need to be looked at.
No, it's not that you're going to misuse it. It's the direct threats to us. Look at our election in November. Look at what our intelligence agencies are saying about the concerns that we have that goes to the stability and security of our democracy.
Yeah.
So I'm not at any means intending to be condescending. I'm talking about where U.S. interests are and why this is a hugely sensitive issue.
So there's that, which is obviously a major issue. I don't think there's any question. On the other hand, there's the bipartisan and longstanding growing demand for burden sharing, and basically saying to U.S. allies, Israel included, certainly to the Gulf Arab countries, you need to do more. You can't always rely on us. So that in a sense, promotes the question of, so technology transfer aside, it promotes these sort of new bilateral relations, such as between Israel and the UAE, that strategic diversification on the part of these allies is a necessary part of being able to share the burden. So that there's this tension there. That's I just wanted to throw that out because you're absolutely right, Myra. I mean, there's no doubt. But then there's that other impetus, and the people find themselves, I think, both Israel and the UAE pushed in both directions, like at the same time. Israel maybe less than most, but still them too. Shall we move on from this, or does anybody want to? Okay, let's move on from this. I have several questions that go to an issue that's probably not easy to answer and maybe not even relevant. So if nobody has anything to say, that's fine. But there are many different people who are asking about the potential for a Middle Eastern strategic alliance, whether aimed at Iran or aimed at regional stability, and whether this could be a step in that direction or not. If anybody has any thoughts on that, that's fine. If not, we'll go on.
I'll just say one word. I think the Middle East Strategic Alliance, at least as it has been formally discussed in the United States by the administration, is a non-starter because it brings together people who aren't going to work with each other.
Yeah.
To think that all the GCC in Qatar and Saudi Arabia and
Well, I think we got the point, but it doesn't have to involve those countries. It could be a less irrational group, but even then, I would be very skeptical. In other words, you could say, well, okay, so a loose coalition of Israel and UAE and Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
That already exists.
Exactly.
As a loose coalition, that's already operating. In fact, now it's not that loose because we already have two of the countries that are signing agreements between them.
It's less loose than it was. That's for sure. Okay. Either of the other two of you want to comment on this rather fanciful notion? Okay.
I'll briefly say something about the regional security architecture that has been discussed. And there has been a number of possible answers. I don't think we've got the formula right yet, but there is a need, and that need makes the question asked several times. And I think we would need to get the answer is not perfect yet. We will need to work on it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Put it lightly.
Excellent. We have a question from Christiana Hayes, who's asking about whether this impacts the UAE's role and anything else to do with Libya, which is an interesting and complicated situation. I wouldn't have thought so, but if any of you has anything to say about that, I thought I'd throw it out there. It's an interesting question.
The only thing I would say is that there is now a trend for de-escalation. And we've seen that in Libya, we've seen that in Yemen, we've seen it somewhere else. And I think, the agreement with Israel is also a step towards the concept of de-escalation. So we're creating a sort of a momentum for that trend. Hope it would sustain.
Hussein Malik says that the U.S. gains something, Israel gains something strategically, but he wants to know from you what is the strategic gain for the UAE more than what they already had in security, economics, etc. I don't think this is mysterious, but we have a question directly asking you, so I'm passing it along.
I think that is what I've answered right at the beginning. What we need, what the UAE keeps saying, is that we need to intensify moderation in this region. A major part of radicalization has been this issue of the Muslim-Jewish conflict, and I think that is part of reducing that. This is the gain. UAE believes in trade as a means of connecting to people, to different countries, and I think any peace agreement would allow that type of trade to move on. There is an economic gain, absolutely. But what we will gain, what we will get actually, is a focus on development rather than focus on conflict.
Right, absolutely. So we've got then a follow-up question, which is, and this is sort of from the opposite point of view, and it's for everybody. It's from Nasreen Yunus, who asks, to what extent could this new understanding be used by Israel to move forward with move towards de jure annexation as opposed to de facto annexation? In other words, we've talked a lot about the role of annexation, but I mean, this person is wondering whether in the end this might push Israelis in that direction in the long run. And I guess I'd begin with Dr. Krasna on that, but anybody can talk about it.
So this is sort of a big question, Israel, and a big question mark, I think, that we're all wonder about, which is that the Israeli government has been, or representatives of the prime minister have been saying, this is a temporary suspension. But it seems pretty clear to me that that this isn't going to happen. Okay. It's not going to happen I don't think it's going to happen if there's a Biden administration. And I think that even if there's a second Trump administration, it's not going to happen because it would threaten a key foreign policy gain. Also, as I said, in Israel, the issue is, on the one hand, very popular with a very specific part of Netanyahu's base, but is not a particularly popular issue. And in fact, polls have said that while people support the idea of annexation, they don't support it if it distances the possibility for normalization of relations with other states. So it's hard for me to write that we've had 3 elections so far. We might be coming up with a 4th. We'll see what kind of government comes out of that 4th election. But I don't see it. I see it staying on the agenda in Israel because it is a political issue. but I don't see it. I don't see its implementation being really possible in any kind of foreseeable short to medium term.
Right. Yeah.
Hussein, I would just say I would agree with that. I just think that also annexation has, from observation here, annexation has posed a challenge for Prime Minister Netanyahu from his right, as well as from his left and from the center. If I put the military security apparatus in the center. So he may have had some core of people who liked the idea, but there were a variety of reasons, because obviously from the right, it's seen as a partial move and not where everything should go. So that's why I had said at the beginning, I think the Emiratis provided a very handy exit strategy.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that's clear. Another question that we have here from O'Hara is, to what extent does the UAE and other countries believe that a two-state solution is still viable? And how does this all affect the prospects for actually coming to such an arrangement? And is it still, in fact, I mean, obviously annexation saves it. Taking annexation off the table certainly saves it from an undeniable mortal blow. But to what extent is it still viable anyway? And is that just kind of a rationalization for doing something which is in the interests of these countries anyway? So there's a lot packed in there, but let's look at it quickly. Anybody want to take a stab?
If I may, the question has been posed several times in different ways. And one of it is that, how do you believe that this was actually annexation? It could have been, an empty card people are waving. And this might be true, but what matters to me is the principle upon which we've agreed, is that there is no occupation of the Palestinian land. Whether there was an actual annexation or not, whether that was a political move or a wild card, the actual principle the whole thing was established on is very clear, and I think in itself is quite a significant achievement.
Yeah, fair enough. Anybody else want to comment on the continued viability or not of a two-state solution in the context of this agreement or in general?
I would just say that it is, it's hard not to look at the reality on the ground, some of the data I said earlier, and see potential as significantly dimming. But that is part of the reason I think it's important to, for a US administration and other key stakeholders in the region, European actors, to have some serious discussions with Palestinians and Israelis across the board on what options might be going forward, and what if continued governance structures remain, what the costs of that would be, because the status quo is not without cost, even if people don't see it moment by moment.
Right. There's one, oh, sorry, Dr. Kresna, go ahead.
Just personal view. I don't know how viable the two-state solution is. I know the one-state solution is not viable.
Yeah,
it's not a solution.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a solution. That's very well put. There is a question which I take to be for me, which I would actually like to answer and take the privilege of. Why is there no serious inclusion of Palestinian views in this event? And that's something I've been waiting to hear it. And I was wondering why we weren't inundated with that on Twitter earlier. And there's a good answer for that, which is this is about an agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates brokered by the United States. And the Palestinian issue is an important issue. Iran is an important issue. Turkey is an important, there are many important issues, but there are three principles in this triad. If we had 10 hours and 8 speakers, then yes, that would be. But I think this is a very logical group of people, in fact, an ideal group of people. And, if you're going to do a conversation like this, this is where to begin. I've spent my whole career kind of talking to and about and with Palestinians. And I'm just not going to make any apologies for having an Emirati, an Israeli, and an American talking about an Emirati-Israeli deal brokered by the Americans. So having said that, let me move on. We do have a number of questions that do go to the Palestinians. And so I'm going to ask you to talk about it because a lot of people are asking how this impacts the potential for a reconciliation. We already talked about the Gulf, but how does this impact at all the potential for reconciliation among Palestinians between the PA and Hamas, between the West Bank and Gaza, etc.? And then I have a follow-up, but which has not got to do with the Palestinians. But can any of you want to address that rather complicated but important issue?
I would just from past involvement at the margins or observation of reconciliation efforts, I can see where this gives some impetus to that. I would not hold out a tremendous amount of confidence with the current leadership of Hamas and of the PA that there is much likelihood of progress there. Again, unless the unknown factor to me would be regional stakeholders deciding to bring them together towards a common vision.
Okay, so then let's then bring in this question from Banafshe Kanoush, and I think this will be our last one, who asks, first of all, she wants to know what's the official Qatari position on the UAE-Israel deal. I guess Mohammed can answer that. And I'm not aware of an official statement. I don't, there must have been one, but I'm not aware of it. And then how does it deal with Qatar's own policies towards Israel beside the issue of Hamas? So we've talked about that a little bit, but that sort of wraps up the thing in terms of linking everything together. Mohammed, to your knowledge, have the Qataris made an official comment? I don't think they have, right? Because I mean, you can see how on the
unofficial views, but not unofficial views.
Yeah, well, and a great deal of angry propaganda on the media, but then other views. But
Hussein, at the same time, very involved in a parallel time period with what's going on in Gaza and how to get assistance into Gaza, and obviously dealing with Israel on those issues.
Well, and more than that, as Dr. Kresna has always pointed out, a very strong relationship with Israel, both above in the 1990s and below the table for a long time. So I'll give you the last word on that one, Dr. Kresna.
Just Qatar is rather complex in terms of Israel, because a lot of people in Israel and a lot of Israel's friends in the United States and other places are very anti-Qatari. Mm-hmm. But Israel has always retained this relationship with Qatar, even when Qatar became more closely linked with some of our other regional rivals, whether it's Iran or whether recently it's Turkey, because the Qataris have first of all been willing to engage with us at a level and as I said, we've always tried to engage with those who are willing to engage with us, but also because specifically in the Gaza sphere, and not only recently, it's gone back quite a few years already, they can deliver in a way that other players maybe can't. I mean, there are two players who can deliver in Gaza. One is Egypt and the other is Qatar. And for that reason, we need them.
Yeah, sure. Somebody's got to pay to keep the ball in the air in Gaza. That's for sure.
That's
can and will and do. And so, I mean, final question for you. How does all of this connect to we talked about Libya, but we haven't talked about the dispute in the Eastern Mediterranean, the dispute which is over so many things all at the same time, but it's frequently called a dispute about natural gas. I think it's about so much more. I'd like to ask all of you how you think it plays in, and that will be our last question. Dr. Krasna, would you like to begin with that?
So I'll just start by saying Israel is very, very involved in the Eastern Med issue, especially because of our sort of semi-official alliance with Cyprus and Greece, which is on several different levels, but now is specifically on the gas level. And the gas level also brought in Egypt and formed this Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, which is now recognized an international organization and is really sort of almost a union of the like-minded in the Eastern Med, in an area which 10 years ago Israel was basically uninterested in at all. So it's quite interesting how this developed. And the UAE doesn't necessarily have a stake there, though they do have some shares in the Egyptian gas fields, but does have a stake in Libya. And Libya is one of the areas where this competition between Turkey and the other countries over Eastern Mediterranean, both maritime boundaries and resources, is playing out. So it's sort of interesting to me to what extent UAE now reaching more formal relation with Israel sort of brings all these different sub-regional conflicts that maybe weren't linked to each other and perhaps are a little bit more linked.
There's also an ideological dimension for the UAE as well. I mean, in terms of Arab political culture, and by which I mean the question of Islamists and not Islamists. And then there's the Egyptian angle. You didn't mention the Egyptians are also players, close allies of the UAE on working good peace with Israel, and part of this loose alliance, you know, with Turkey and with Greece and Cyprus and whatnot to oppose Turkey's claims. So yes,
Hussein, on that, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to jump off. But I would just point out that the fact that Germany is playing a key broker role here in trying to resolve it. Thank you to Germany for doing that, but also shows the tremendous vacuum and abdication by the United States, that Germany is the broker at this point.
Yeah, because you have the EU divided here with Italy and France on different sides, NATO divided with Greece and Turkey confronting each other. It's you know, something the United States really ought to be brokering, and it's insane that it's Angela Merkel taking the lead, and we don't even seem to care. Mohammed, can you address the issue of how? Thank you, Myra. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before we close completely, I would like to hear Mohammed, you know, just give his views, on how the relationship, growing relationship, not just this agreement, but the growing relationship envisaged between Israel and UAE impacts or has to do with, in any sense, the Eastern Med region, and particularly UAE's interests, which are surprisingly strong for a country that is, you know, geographically remote from the Eastern Mediterranean.
Okay, without going into much details,
it is complicated.
I would agree with you on the Egyptian angle, because the Egyptian angle is very important. The UAE has agreements with mutual defense agreements with Egypt. Egypt has got national security threats from the Sinai Desert and on the Libyan borders. So that is an important commitment for the UAE. But on the larger issue, it's this issue of destabilization efforts. And whether it comes from Daesh, whether it comes from Al-Qaeda, whether it comes from Iran, whether it comes from the Muslim Brotherhoods, this is what the UAE looks at. And again, East Mediterranean is very important as a gateway to Europe for trade, for oil. And I think any destabilization there is something that we all need to work on. And I think this is the angle where, you know, Israel, UAE, US, even EU are looking at it from that point. We don't need any more destabilization in that very volatile and very important region. And I think we all agree on the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So we've already lost Myra. She told me she had a hard break at 11, and we've gone 4 minutes over time. So I'd like to thank both of you very much for joining us. Mohammed from Dubai, Josh Krasna from Israel, and of course we had Myra Rudman as well. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us online, and please join us sometime soon. Recommend this discussion to your friends when it's online tomorrow. It's been really a great one, as I expected. What a great panel. Thank you so much.